have a question for you. When was the last time you sat down to have a meal and you thought, I wonder how much plastic I'm about to get in my meal? Now, many years ago, that wouldn't have even come up. And today, family, I'm here to tell you it's another story. Today, we're going to break it down. We are talking about plastics in your blood. Yes, plastics in your blood. We're talking about tiny particles of plastic, so small that you can't see them, microscopic, right? Can't smell them, taste them at all. And they're showing up inside the human body, in the blood, in the lungs, in the liver, and in the heart, even in the brains of laboratory animals. Now, in 2024, for the first time, a landmark study published in one of the most respected medical journals in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine, connected microplastics directly to a higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and even death in human patients. That's not fringe theory. And that's not someone on the internet trying to alarm you. That is peer-reviewed science published at the highest level. So today, we are going to talk about what microplastics actually are, how they get inside us, what the science says about what they do once they get there, and we're going to talk about some of the most vulnerable people affected, including pregnant women and their unborn babies. Now, if you're not new to my channel, you know that almost all of my content is directed toward mature adults. In fact, all of it is, especially baby boomers. However, this subject is something that I felt it's been on my mind for a long time. And I figured, you know what? Honor your instincts and go ahead and share this information. So this is for the whole family. Stay with me. Alrighty, what are microplastics and where do they come from? Starting at the beginning, because the word microplastic gets thrown around a lot, and it helps to understand what we're talking about. A microplastic is simply a plastic particle that is smaller than 5 millimeters. That's roughly the size of a sesame seed at the very largest end of the scale. But many of the particles scientists are finding inside the human body are far, far smaller than that. We're talking about particles measured in micrometers, thousandths of a millimeter, invisible to the naked eye. And then there are the nanoplastics, which are even tinier still. They're so small that they can pass through the cell wall. They're measured in billionths of a meter. Now, where do they come from? Obviously, different places. Some microplastics are manufactured that way. Those little micro beads that are used in exfoliating face scrubs and toothpaste, for instance. Many countries have banned those. I'm not sure if we have. However, the far bigger source is plastic that is breaking down. Every piece of plastic ever made is still out there in some form. Every piece of plastic ever made. Plastic does not biodegrade. It just breaks apart into smaller and smaller pieces. The plastic bag from 1987, the water bottle from 2003, the packaging from your lunch last Tuesday, all of it over time, under the influence of sunlight, heat, water, and physical wear, crumbles down into microplastics and nanoplastics that make their way into our soil, our water, and even into our air. Think about that for a moment. Every plastic item that has ever been produced on this planet, and we have produced over 8 billion metric tons of the stuff since the 1950s, is still in the environment in one form or another. And it keeps breaking down, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, yet not disappearing. You know, I think about rocks, how over centuries they become smaller rocks and smaller and smaller, and then some of them can even become sand, but they don't go away. That's what's happening with the plastics. Scientists have found microplastics in the deepest ocean trenches on Earth, in Arctic ice, on top of Mount Everest, in rainwater falling in the most remote wilderness areas. There's no place on Earth that is not touched by plastic. Scientists, of course, are saying that there's no place in the human body that is untouched either. Whoa. How do they get inside the human body? Obviously, here's where it gets really personal. Microplastics get into the human body through 3 main pathways: what we eat and drink and breathe, and to a lesser extent, through our skin. What we eat and drink. Let's start with food and water because that's the big one. Seafood is one of the most significant dietary sources of microplastics. Fish, shellfish, and other seafood all accumulate plastic particles from the water that they live in. But it doesn't stop there. Microplastics have been found in salt, both sea salt and rock salt. They've been found in honey, in beer, in bottled water, in tap water, in fruit, in vegetables, in meat packaged in plastic wrap, and in baby food stored in plastic containers. There's actually some research suggesting that drinking water from plastic bottles exposes you to significantly more microplastics than drinking tap water. Though tap water has its own share, and you really can't escape it through the food supply alone. Now, this doesn't really get enough attention. Plastic food containers and packaging leach microplastics and chemical compounds directly into your food, especially when it's heated. That takeout container that you put in the microwave, the plastic wrap over last night's leftovers, the coffee cup lid, all of these contribute. Inhalation, what we breathe. This one surprises most people. Research indicates that people inhale an estimated 68,000 microplastic particles every single day. Not a year, a day. These particles come from synthetic textiles. The lint from your washing machine, for example, releases millions of plastic fibers into the wastewater and the air every single wash cycle. They come from the breakdown of vehicle tires on the road, which generate an enormous amount of microplastic dust. They come from synthetic carpets and upholstery, from construction materials, from industrial activities. Indoor air, surprisingly, can actually have higher concentrations of microplastics than outdoor air because the particles all get settled in the dust and they accumulate in our homes and in the workplaces. That's another good reason to keep the dust down in your home, right? The spaces we spend most of our lives are not the safe havens that we imagine them to be. Fine particles smaller than 10 micrometers reach all the way into the lungs, and even smaller particles below 1 micrometer can cross from the lungs directly into the bloodstream, which is where our conversation really gets serious. Then there's skin contact. Skin absorption is considered a smaller pathway than eating and breathing, yet it's not negligible. Cosmetics, personal care products, and synthetic clothing all bring microplastics into contact with our skin. And for nanoplastics, the very smallest particles, skin penetration is a real possibility. Now, what happens once microplastics are inside the body? We know they're getting in. The question is, what do they do once they get there? The honest answer is that science is still working to understand the full picture, meaning we don't know. We don't have a clue. Okay, let's just be real. All right. Research has accelerated rapidly, though, in the last 5 years, and what is emerging is genuinely cause for real concern. Even as scientists are careful, what we do know is that microplastics have now been found in virtually every tissue and organ in the human body that scientists have looked for them. The blood, like I said before, the lungs, the liver, the colon, the spleen, the kidneys, the heart muscle, even in human brain tissue. They have found microplastics in human breast milk. They have been found in testicles. They have been found in the placentas of pregnant women, which we are going to return to shortly because that one deserves its own conversation. These particles don't just sit there harmlessly. Once inside, they can do several things. First of all, we're back to inflammation, right? Inflammation and oxidative stress. The body recognizes plastic particles, of course, as foreign, which they are, and it launches an immune response, a defense response. And that defense response, sustained over years and decades of ongoing exposure, produces chronic inflammation and what we call oxidative stress. So a lot of the time when we talk about food and we talk about habits and lifestyle, sometimes we tend to judge and say, well, the person shouldn't do this. And, well, if you did that, we're breathing it in. I just have to let that sit in for a minute. Okay. So we're talking about chronic inflammation because of oxidative stress, which is essentially cellular damage caused by unstable molecules called free radicals. You've heard of them before, and I've mentioned them before. And in fact, I'm going to give some content, and it won't be as long as this one. And it's really going to give you a visual of what happens with free radicals. It's fascinating. Inflammation, though, chronic inflammation is not a small thing. It is the underlying driver of a wide range of serious diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's. And when we talk about the potential long-term health effects of microplastics, this inflammatory pathway is one of the central concerns, okay, when we're dealing with long-term health. Then there's the endocrine disruption. Plastics don't travel alone. The particles themselves carry chemical additives, things like plasticizers, flame retardants, UV stabilizers, and colorants that were built into the plastic during manufacturing. Many of these chemicals are known endocrine disruptors, meaning they interfere with the body's hormone system. Your endocrine system governs an enormous range of functions: your metabolism, reproduction, growth, mood, defense regulation, and much more. And when it gets disrupted, particularly during critical developmental windows like pregnancy and early childhood, the consequences can be profound and they can be long lasting. Some of the chemical compounds associated with plastics, like the BPAs and the various phthalates, have been studied for decades and are linked to hormonal imbalance, fertility issues, metabolic disorders, and developmental problems in children. The cardiovascular system. This is arguably the most significant human health finding so far. This is the one that should matter deeply to anyone who cares about their heart health. In March of 2024, a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine examined people who had undergone surgery to remove plaque buildup from their arteries, a condition that we call carotid artery disease. When researchers analyzed the plaque that was removed, they found microplastics in the arterial plaque of a significant number of patients. Those patients with detectable microplastics in their arterial plaque had a substantially higher risk of heart attack, stroke, of death over the following 2.5 years compared to patients whose plaque did not contain these detectable microplastics. In 2024, multi-center studies. It is important to be fair here that particular study was done in mice, not people, and scientists are always careful about applying animal results directly to humans. Yet the researchers themselves said that this raises real concerns about long-term effects on brain health, mood, and heart health. And there's also early research looking into whether microplastics might play some role in diseases that affect memory, like Alzheimer's. This research is still in its early days, but scientists have already found microplastic particles inside human brain tissue, which itself is a notable and fairly recent discovery. Your liver. A review of 25 separate scientific studies published between 2022 and 2025 looked specifically at how microplastics affect human liver cells. Across these studies, researchers consistently found signs of cell stress, inflammation, and disrupted function in liver cells exposed to microplastics, with the very smallest particles, those nanoplastics, causing the most harm. Since your liver's job is to filter out things that don't belong in your body, it makes sense that it would be one of the organs most affected by ongoing plastic exposure. Now, pregnancy and newborn babies. Think about your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. I have 6 great-grandchildren. Now, I want to slow down and spend real time on this because it really deserves our full attention. What is happening with pregnant women, unborn babies, and newborns? If what we've covered so far is concerning for a fully grown adult, it's even more concerning for a tiny developing human being who has no defenses in place yet. Plastic inside the womb. The placenta, which we know what the placenta is supposed to act like a protective filter between a mother and her unborn baby, letting good things like nutrients through while keeping harmful things out. But research has found that microplastics are able to get through this filter. Back in 2021, a research team in Italy examined human placentas after birth and found tiny plastic particles inside them. On the mother's side, on the baby's side, and in the tissue in between. Plastic was found in 2 out of every 3 placentas they studied. Since then, scientists have also found microplastics in the amniotic fluid, in the umbilical cord blood, and in a newborn baby's very first bowel movement. You know, it's called the meconium. Wow. There's good news, I promise you. There's always something we can do. Yet we have to know what the issue is so that we can know what to do about it. Hang in there. Don't hang. Just stay there. In 2024, there was a study from China in which researchers looked closely at 9 mothers and their babies. They found microplastic particles in the cord blood, the placenta, and the first stool of all 9 babies, every single one. And in early 2025, researchers presented findings at a major medical conference showing that placentas from babies born too early, known, of course, as premature babies, had higher levels of microplastic than placentas from babies born on time. The scientists raised the possibility that the buildup of plastics in the placenta may actually be one of the things contributing to the early birth, not just something that happens alongside it. That's interesting. That's something to think about. So why does this matter so much for a developing baby? It's important to understand this about pregnancy and early childhood for these reasons, for obvious reasons. Doctors call this time a critical window of development. Studies done in animals, which often give scientists an early warning sign before human studies are possible, have shown that mothers exposed to microplastics during pregnancy can have babies with slower growth, changes in brain development, and disruptions to the defense system and metabolism. They're helpless. Remember, those hormone-disrupting chemicals we talked about earlier, the ones that ride alongside the plastic particles, those are an especially big concern during pregnancy because a baby's entire body, organs, brain, defense system is being shaped by hormone signals during these 9 months. And the exposure doesn't stop at birth. Once a baby is born, the exposure to microplastics doesn't end. In some ways, in many ways, it continues. Researchers have found microplastics in human breast milk. So even babies who are breastfed, which is otherwise the healthiest way to feed an infant, it's still the healthiest way, they are still being exposed. For babies fed with formula, there's an extra concern worth knowing about, And that study is one that was done from Trinity College, Dublin. And they found that when plastic baby bottles are prepared the normal way, using hot water to mix the formula, the heat causes the plastic to release a huge number of microplastic particles directly into the milk. On average, more than 1 million particles per liter. Beyond feeding, babies and toddlers spend a lot of time crawling on the floor and putting things in their mouths, toys, blankets, and even their own hands. And this means pound for pound, they may be taking in more microplastics than adults do. Oh my. Here's the part that worries doctors the most. Babies and young children don't yet have fully developed systems for cleaning foreign particles out of their bodies. Their organs, including the brain, liver, and defense system, are still under construction, and that makes them much more vulnerable, not less. Could this affect future generations? There's one more area scientists are watching closely: whether the effects of early life exposure to microplastics could be passed down in some way to future generations. Animal studies have shown that early exposure to microplastics can change the balance of gut bacteria. You know how important that gut bacteria is. We've talked about the microbiota. Of course, in other, actually, it's in my Eat Well playlist. So we know that gut bacteria is extremely important, and it can alter how the defense system develops, and it affects metabolism in ways that show up in the next generation of animals, not just the one that was directly exposed. Nobody can say for certain yet whether the same is true in humans, but scientists are actively studying it, and it adds an extra layer of importance to this whole conversation. This may not just be about our own health. It may be about the health of children and grandchildren not yet born. New life near death. How to prepare your life and health for the unexpected is now available. Click on the link in the description and get your copy so that you will know how to be better prepared. Now, just how much plastic are we talking about? Let's put some real numbers to this, because I think it helps to understand just how big this issue really is. Scientists estimate that the average person takes in roughly 5 grams of microplastics every week through the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. 5 grams is about the weight of a credit card. This much every week? Oh my gosh. Yeah, unbelievable. 5 grams microplastic every week. Yeah, a credit card's worth of plastic every single week going into our bodies. Over a full year, that adds up to about 250 grams, roughly the weight of a smartphone. Over 10 years, you're looking at several pounds. And most of us are well over 10 years. No wonder things are going on. Anyway, I digress. Let's get to the good part. Let's get through the important part, though. And I trust this is something that you find valuable. I know I did, and that's why I shared it. That's why I'm sharing it now. Okay, now, once again, to be fair and balanced, not all of that plastic stays in your body. A good portion of it passes through your digestive system and leaves the body naturally. However, research has confirmed that some portion especially the very smallest nanoparticles. Some of that, the smallest portion, does not all leave the body. It does build up in our organs and tissues over time. Now, here's something especially relevant for many of us watching and many of you watching. If you were born between 1940s and the 1960s, baby boomers, yay, baby boomers, you grew up during the time that plastic production exploded across the world. Plastic became part of everyday American and global life. Packaging, toys, appliances, furniture, clothing. That means your generation, our generation, has been quietly building up exposure to this stuff for a longer stretch of time than almost anyone else alive today. That's not meant to alarm you. It's meant to explain why this conversation is especially relevant to you and to people of our age. I should say to us and the people of our age. So what about your lungs and breathing? Whew. Since breathing in microplastics is one of the main ways that it enters our bodies, and this matters a great deal for older adults. Researchers have found microplastic particles deep inside human lung tissue, proof that these particles are traveling all the way down into our airways when we breathe. Oh, that makes you want to wear a mask if you didn't want to wear one before. I'm not making light of it, I promise, but those thoughts do pop into my head. Scientists studying this have found that the same harmful processes we talked about earlier, stress on the cells, the inflammation, and the cell damage, also happen in the lungs. Over time, this may make conditions like COPD and asthma and the stiffening of the lung tissue worse, or possibly even contribute to them developing in the first place. If you already live with a breathing condition, or if you were a smoker at some point in your life, this is worth mentioning to your doctor. And the good news is your indoor air, which we talked about earlier as a hidden source of microplastics, is something that you actually have a fair amount of control over. And we'll cover some practical steps for that in just a bit. And that's interesting. I have a friend who sells an apparatus that was created by NASA. And you might have seen me wearing a little white rectangular apparatus. And it does help to clear the air all around you. And as my defense system, if most of you know my story, I'm still recovering from leukemia, 100% clean and clear, I must say. However, when I was really just recovering, I wanted to be sure that when I started going out among other people, that at least the air around me was more ionized. And I'm going to interview him, and we can talk about that because it fits very well into this conversation. The next section, and we're almost finished, surprising everyday sources that you probably didn't know about. Well, let's go through a few of these items that are sources of microplastic that may genuinely surprise you. Tea bags. Yeah, I knew about that one. Many store-bought tea bags are made with a fine plastic mesh, not just paper. They feel like paper, however, there's plastic in there. And studies have shown that steeping just one of these plastic tea bags in hot water can release billions of microplastic particles into your cup. Billions from one tea bag. And if you're a regular tea drinker, switching to paper tea bags or loose leaf tea is a real simple change. We always talk about one simple change that we can make. And I'll tell you, I'm loving being able to have loose leaf tea. Anyway, we'll talk about that later too. We have a whole series on drinking well, and you better believe we'll be talking about tea and bottled water. A 2024 study found that a single liter of bottled water can contain hundreds of thousands of tiny plastic particles, far more than scientists previously believed. Now they have better tools to detect the smallest particles, those nanoparticles, leaving plastic water bottles sitting in a hot car makes this worse. And since heat speeds up the breakdown of plastics, that's something that you may not want to do anymore. The clothes we wash. Fabrics like polyester, nylon, acrylic, and fleece are essentially a type of woven plastics. That's one of the reasons why I stopped using the acrylics, because I knit. I'm a knitter, and I knit gifts for my family. I don't want to give them anything toxic. They're getting enough already, right? So now I'm just doing strictly either wool, silk, linen, 100% natural fibers. So you might want to think about that when you choose the clothing that you buy. Every time you wash them, that is, the fabrics like polyester, nylon, and acrylic and fleece are essentially this woven plastic. And every time you wash them, the washing machine knocks loose tiny plastic threads, microfibers. You know what I'm thinking, right? Microfibers. They made a big deal of how fabulous and wonderful these microfiber cloths are. Well, I'm throwing mine away. Goodness gracious. They end up in our water supply and in our air. A simple fix is installing a microfiber filter. A microfiber filter on your washing machine, which catches many of these fibers before they go down the drain. Well. That's something to look into, right? We're getting to some solutions. That non-stick coating on many pots and pans, often known by the brand name Teflon, is a type of plastic coating. We know that. And when it gets scratched or overheated, it can release particles into your food. Stainless steel, cast iron, good old cast iron, or ceramic cookware are good alternatives. I have my cast iron pots, and lately I've been using the ceramic ones. And of course, the stainless steel. Plastic cutting boards. I use a wooden one. I'm sure you've seen that in some of my videos. Cutting food on plastic actually shaves off small bits of this plastic with every slice, and those bits end up in your food or on your food. A wooden or bamboo cutting board avoids this problem. Heating food in plastic. I don't even store my food in plastic anymore. I have a whole video that I'm going to do to show you how in today's world, in 2026, you can still use glass, and you can find ways to avoid all of this plastic. Well, maybe not avoid, but avoid much of this plastic. Let's be real. This one is worth repeating clearly. Please don't heat food in a plastic container or cover your food with plastic wrap if you use a microwave. Some of us do, and some of us don't. However, if you do, please don't put plastic in the microwave. Heat causes the plastic to release far more particles into your food. Glass or ceramic containers. Just be careful because the ceramic will get hot. They're a better choice for reheating. Or just take out the pot. That's what I do. Just take out the pan, throw a little water in the pan, and heat the food. Call it a day. Here's another one. Store receipts. Many store receipts are printed on a special paper coated with the chemical BPA, the same kind of hormone disrupting chemical that we talked about earlier. Simply touching these receipts transfers some of that chemical right onto your skin. If you don't need the receipt, it's perfectly fine to decline it. And I always tell them too, I'll say, I don't need the receipt, honey. And they're really toxic. Perhaps you should wear gloves and not latex ones. Maybe they're just some plain old rubber gloves you can wear because they are very toxic. I tell the cashier, they don't know, and they're handling it all day long. Okay, section 9, we're almost there. What can we actually do about all this? I have shared a lot with you today, and I don't want to leave you feeling helpless. What I prefer to focus on that which I want and desire rather than what I don't want. So I would like to leave you feeling empowered. This is the honest truth. You cannot completely avoid microplastics. They're in the air, the water, the food, everywhere around us. No single person can change that on their own. There is real difference between completely eliminating exposure, which is impossible, and meaningfully reducing it, which absolutely is. Let me walk you through some simple, doable steps. First of all, with your drinking water, a good water filter for your kitchen tap, especially one labeled reverse osmosis, which catches very fine particles, can meaningfully cut down the microplastic in your drinking water. And use glass or stainless steel cups and glasses, and even your water bottle instead of a plastic one when you're out and about. You've heard me mention a little earlier that we triple filter ours because when we moved to where we are now, we used to have one that, and we still do, it doesn't fit. That's for the whole house, and that attaches to the faucet. And since we don't have that now, we just use the same. I have a Brita, we have a Pure, we have had several different kinds. One that called Zero Water, I believe. Anyway, currently we're using 3. I don't remember the last one. And I go from one, I keep them in different colors so that I'll know which one to do next. So you fill up from the faucet, you fill one and let that filter, and then pour that into another one and let that filter, and then pour it into a last one and let that filter. So that's what I'm drinking now, triple filtered water. You might want to do that. Okay, so now with food and cooking. And switch your food storage containers to glass, stainless steel, or ceramic. Never microwave food in plastic. Never. Swap a plastic cutting board for a wooden or a bamboo one. We mentioned that before. And switch from plastic tea bags to paper. And make sure that you know that that paper doesn't have it. Now, there are some, I know of some that do not have plastic, although I prefer the loose leaf tea now. I've gotten accustomed to it. And tea that you can put into powder, for instance, the matcha, the real good matcha, that's in a powdered form. However, there are some brands that have been named that are free of plastics, and some major brands that do have plastic. And look that up, honey, because I'm sorry, I forgot to bring it with me. And this is long enough as it is, so I'm not going to hold you up to go look for that list. So just check online which tea bags do not have plastic, or which tea bags do have plastic, or just search plastics, tea bag plastics, and that information will come up for you. Next time I'll be more thorough and have it all out and prepared for you. I've begun switching my food. I use glass just about for everything. And I've even used cloths. I bought extra cotton cloths. I think that's in one of my videos already. And wrap that first, and then wrap the cloth. Wrap the cloth first, rather, and then you can wrap it in parchment paper, too, if you're wrapping, for instance, if you wrap bread. There are many things you can do, many ways that you can do that. So none of these changes are expensive or complicated, and together they do add up. Now, air in your home. Vacuum regularly using a HEPA filter, the HEPA filter, which traps very fine dust instead of blowing it back into the air. Open your windows. Every now and then I love to open my windows early in the morning, no matter what the temperature is outside. So open those windows and let the fresh air circulate. And if you're ever replacing your flooring, consider hardwood or tile or natural fiber rugs instead of synthetic carpets. With your laundry, consider that microfiber filter we spoke of before for your washing machine. These are inexpensive add-on devices. Wash synthetic clothing on shorter, cooler cycles when you can, if you must have synthetic clothing, since this releases fewer fibers, and where it makes sense, choose natural fibers like cotton, wood, linen, or silk. For expecting mothers and young families, if you are pregnant, or if your daughter or your granddaughter is pregnant, or if you have someone else close to you who is expecting, all of the steps above matter even more during this time because, as was mentioned, a developing baby is far more sensitive than an adult body. And one especially practical tip: when preparing baby formula, glass baby bottles are a much better choice than plastic ones. If a plastic bottle must be used, letting the hot water cool down a bit before mixing the formula helps to reduce how much plastic leaches into the milk. Goodness gracious. That's all I can say. As it's always worth bringing this topic up with your doctor or midwife, since awareness of this research is still spreading through the medical community. So it's good to let them know. Obviously, all of this conversation is for us individually, right? Individual choices do matter. However, they are not the whole solution, and we know that. This is at its heart a much bigger problem that requires companies to make different choices in how they manufacture and package products. And it requires governments to put better rules in place around plastic production and waste. Simply staying informed, talking about this with the people in your life, and supporting efforts to reduce plastic pollution in your community, they all genuinely make a difference. Change happens when enough people understand a problem and start asking for something better. And I promise you, if we stop buying that plastic, they'd hurry up and find another solution. Just a thought. What I want you to remember, we have covered a lot today, so let me bring it all together simply. Microplastics are real, and they are inside us. That's not a guess. It's been confirmed by careful scientific studies from trusted institutions, including Stanford, Harvard, the Mayo Clinic, major universities around the world. We don't yet have every answer about exactly what this means for our long-term health, but what we already do know is important, and that is, especially when it comes to heart health, ongoing inflammation, hormone disruption, and the effects on babies before and after birth. It's serious enough to deserve our attention, not panic, just honest attention. This research has been published in some of the most respected medical journals in the world: New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, and others. These aren't tabloids making wild claims. These are careful, peer-reviewed studies. And if you want to know what peer-reviewed studies are really about, I believe I have an article on, a video on that. It's really important to know. Well, people really get to know what real research means. And that's why everything that I share is researched. Just know that. It's been proven, in other words. The research keeps growing, and it tells us that this conversation isn't going away anytime soon. If you're a grandparent watching this or a parent of a young child, I want to say something directly to you. The next generation is being born into a world that is much more saturated with plastic than any generation before them. And in some cases, they're being exposed before they're even taking their first breath. They deserve our attention, our care, and whatever small changes we're able to make on their behalf. None of us can solve this problem alone. Each one of us can make a few thoughtful changes, and we can talk to our doctors, we can talk to our families, and we can stop buying that plastic as much as possible. And we can be part of asking the bigger changes, asking for the bigger changes that only happen with enough pressure, sad to say, and when enough people care and show that they care and not just give it lip service. If this video was helpful to you, please consider sharing it with someone you care about. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I know that it was a lot of information, and yet I hope that it was explained clearly, and I trust that you will walk away feeling more informed rather than more worried. More informed. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. Take care of yourself and take care of each other. Peace.